All right, let's jump into the world of Ig Nobel Prizes. Where things get a little weird and maybe we laugh a little, but then we have to stop and think. And this year's winners, well, you sent over some articles, and let me tell you, I am ready to uncover the science behind all the laughs.
It's incredible, isn't it? The Ig Nobels, they have this way of taking research that at first glance might seem strange or even, dare I say, silly, but when you look closer, there's this surprising depth.
Absolutely. It's like a good reminder that science doesn't have to always be serious, intimidating. Sometimes you stumble upon the most interesting questions by being playfully curious. But before we get ahead of ourselves with this year's winners, for anyone who might not be familiar with the Ig Nobels, what are we even talking about here?
So every year, the Ig Nobel Prizes, they recognize research that, as they say, first makes people laugh, then makes them think.
Makes you think,
It's a celebration of the unconventional, the imaginative, sometimes, let's face it, the seemingly ridiculous parts of science.
And let's not forget the ceremony itself,
Yeah.
held at no other than Harvard University, with actual Nobel laureates handing out these awards, and the paper airplanes.
Oh, absolutely. Paper airplanes flying everywhere. It's this amazing blend of scientific rigor and lighthearted fun. It's like this chance for researchers to let loose a little, embrace the absurdity of their work, and share their passion for knowledge in a way that's, well, both entertaining and thought-provoking.
So with that in mind, let's dive into some of these 2024 winners. The articles you sent over cover everything from dead trout physics to the surprisingly predictable way a coin lands. Where should we begin?
How about we kick things off with something that I'm sure will pique your interest?
Okay.
How do fish, and get this, use farts to communicate?
Fish farts. Okay, you're right. That definitely falls into the laugh out loud category, but I have a feeling there's got to be more to it.
Oh, there absolutely is. Researchers, they discovered that herring, that those are a type of fish, they release bubbles, let's just say, from their behinds as a way to, get this, signal their location to other herring. And they're doing this in the dark depths of the ocean. It's actually a brilliant way to communicate, especially in environments where you don't have visual cues.
You've got to be kidding me. That's wild. All right, so from now on, whenever I see a school of fish, I'm going to have to remember they might be chatting away down there with their underwater toots. But let's move on from fish flatulence for a sec. Another study caught my eye. Exploding paper bags next to cats that are on the backs of cows. Okay, that sounds completely nuts. What's the science behind that?
Well, believe it or not, this study is about milk production. Yeah, the researchers, they were looking into a technique called fear conditioning. Basically, they're exposing cows to a sudden, startling thing, in this case, the sound of that paper bag bopping. They wanted to see if it had any impact on their milk letdown, that response. And the cats, well, they were there to try to keep the cows calm before the explosion.
Okay, now that is just brilliant. It's like they took the most outlandish situation and turned it into this legitimate scientific study. And it really makes you think, what other ridiculous-sounding questions out there might lead to unexpected discoveries?
Exactly. And that's the beauty of these Ig Nobels. They encourage us to think differently, question what we think we know, and never, ever underestimate a good laugh.
So we've got fish farts, exploding paper bags.
Yeah.
Are you ready to pick a couple of these studies and really go in depth? I'm particularly interested in the dead trout and that coin flip one.
Let's do it. The dead trout study, that one, it's not just about morbid curiosity. It delves into this fascinating world of fluid dynamics.
Okay, so dead trout and fluid dynamics. Not exactly a phrase you hear every day. So fill me in. What's the story?
All right, so picture this. A deceased trout. And yes, this is real, actual science. And it's placed in, let's say, a tank of water. What the researchers found was, under certain conditions, the trout can still, well, it can still kind of swim, even though it's not alive.
Hold on, so a dead fish swimming. I have to say, that's both kind of gross, but also incredibly intriguing. How is that even possible?
Well, it all comes down to something called a vortex street.
A vortex street.
Yeah, so imagine you have this stream of water flowing around, well, an object, right? As the water goes past, it creates these swirling currents. These are called vortices. And a vortex street is basically a pattern of these vortices. They alternate, kind of like picture spinning tops trailing behind this object as it moves through the water.
Okay, I think I can see that. But how does that make a dead fish swim?
So under the right conditions, the vortices created by that water flowing around the trout's body, it actually creates enough force to propel it forward. It's like the trout is, well, kind of surfing on these invisible underwater whirlpools.
That is amazing. So what you're saying is, even in death, A trout can use physics to move through water.
Precisely. But it's not just about these, dead fish, as interesting as they are. This study actually helps us understand fluid dynamics more broadly. See, by studying these vortex streets, researchers can figure out how fluids and objects interact, which we can then apply to, well, tons of things. Designing underwater vehicles that work better, even understanding how air flows around planes.
Wow, so a study that starts with a dead fish could actually help us build better submarines and airplanes. That is definitely making me think, okay, ready to change things up and talk about that coin toss study.
Absolutely. Let's do it. This is one that really makes you question what you think you know about probability and randomness.
Right. From what I got from the article of this research, it involved a crazy number of coin flips, like 350,000. And what they found is there's actually a bit of a bias in how a coin lands.
That's right. Turns out a flipped coin is a little more likely to land on the same side it started on.
So all those times calling heads or tails thinking it was a 50-50 shot, I was wrong.
Well, not completely. The bias, it's very, very slight. But statistically, it's actually significant. It comes down to the physics of flipping a coin. Stuff like the starting position of the coin, how hard you flip it, even these little imperfections in the coin itself.
So what, like next time I'm watching, say, a football game and they're doing the coin toss, I should be paying close attention to which side is up before the knife.
Well, it might, just might, give you the tiniest edge. But I wouldn't bet on it. It's more about how this study reveals these hidden things in something we just assume is random.
It's like they say, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. Which actually, I think that's a great transition to talking about the bigger picture, the importance of the Ig Nobel Prizes. They're funny, yeah, but they make us question our assumptions, and spark a curiosity about the world.
You got it. And they highlight how important it is to look at science with a sense of playfulness. Sometimes those groundbreaking discoveries come from asking questions that seem kind of silly, or just exploring ideas in ways we don't normally consider.
It's like they're saying, hey, science isn't just about finding answers. It's about being okay with what we don't know and asking, what if?
And sometimes those answers, they're way more hilarious and thought-provoking than you would ever imagined.
Speaking of hilarious and thought-provoking, you mentioned earlier about a study separating drunk and sober worms using chromatography. Can we talk about that one?
Ah, yes, the tipsy worms study. This is a perfect example of how an experiment can seem kind of out there, but then it's got some real-world uses.
Okay, before we jump into the uses, hold on. How do you even make a worm drunk for science?
So these researchers, they used a specific type of roundworm, one that's used in research a lot. Some of the worms were exposed to basically alcohol, while the others weren't.
Okay, so we've got our control group and our, shall we say, party worm group. But how do you separate the tipsy worms from the teetotalers? That's where this chromatography comes in.
Exactly. Chromatography, it's this technique to separate the stuff in a mixture. And in this situation, the mixture, it's the worms.
It's really amazing when you think about it. These Ig Nobel studies, they might start with something that seems, well, just plain funny, but then they kind of open up these paths of thought you wouldn't expect.
It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? Makes you reconsider what you thought you knew.
Exactly. I mean, look at what we've been talking about. Fish communication, cow psychology, the physics of flipping a coin. It's wild, this journey through these unexpected areas of science. But shifting gears for a moment, you mentioned earlier that one study in particular got you thinking about some bigger questions.
Yeah, that's right. The one about supercentenarians, the people who live to be 110 or older.
Right, supercentenarian.
What really fascinated me wasn't just, this idea of living that long, but more about how the study showed how hard it is to make sure those age claims are actually true.
Oh, right. They were talking about how birth records, especially those from over a century ago, might not be totally reliable.
Exactly. Think about it. We depend so much on historical records to figure out demographics, trends and how long people live. But this study, it's like a reminder, those records, they're not perfect. Even little mistakes or inconsistencies in how things were recorded, those can snowball, and then it affects how we understand something as big as the human lifespan.
Makes you realize we might think we've got it all figured out with all our fancy technology and data analysis. But when we try to understand something like extreme old age, we're still kind of stuck with whatever records we have from way back when.
I know, it's humbling, right? And it highlights how important it is to keep researching, keep analyzing what we think we know. We can't just accept information as fact, even when it seems simple, like when someone was born.
Which, in a way, brings us right back to the heart of these Ig Nobel Prizes. They push us to question everything, to dig a little deeper, and to never shy away from the unconventional.
Yes, perfectly said. You know, the Ig Nobels, what it really comes down to is encouraging that sense of curiosity, that wonder about the world.
It's not even just about the funny research, it's about what that represents.
Mm.
The desire to explore and understand.
Absolutely. It's this reminder that science is always changing, always discovering something new. It's full of surprises, and sometimes, well, the most amazing discoveries come from those questions that make you laugh.
And maybe that's a good place to wrap up our Ig Nobel deep dive for today.
I think so. We've gone from the weird to the wonderful, explored this surprisingly insightful world of, let's face it, improbable research.
And it's all thanks to these curious minds, people who dared to ask those questions nobody else thought to ask.
It's been quite a journey. Hopefully it's given us all a good laugh, made us think a little, and maybe even made us question what we thought we knew about science, about the world around us.
And for our listeners, we'll leave you with this thought. What seemingly ridiculous research question would you pursue if you had the chance? What mysteries of this universe would you unravel, armed with nothing but your curiosity, a lab coat, and of course a sense of humor?
Go out there and explore. And never forget, sometimes those unexpected paths lead to the most amazing discoveries.